Okay, welcome to the second Prog Report Top 5 podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed the first one on the cruise to the edge. Thanks to Jeff Wagner for being on that one. Recently, if you follow the Prog Report website, we did a ranking of Neal Morse albums because he's on tour supporting his new album, Life and Times, which is a more of a singer-songwriter element for him. Of course, he's well known for the Prog epics and all these concept albums. So we did a list just analyzing those, his solo work, and a couple of the albums with the Neal Morse band. And it was a huge success online. We got a lot of debates. A lot of people online were posting what their ranking of the 9 albums was. So I thought because I am... I know a lot of people that are in sort of the Neal Morse fan club, so to speak, based, from going to Morse Fest and cruises and things like that. I thought I'd bring a couple of the well-versed fans of Neal Morse and his music onto the podcast here. Both are accomplished writers and involved in music in their own various ways. And this is very international, which is great. We have somebody in the UK and we have somebody in South Africa. So first, let me introduce Nick. Nick, I don't want to bastardize your last name because I always call you... Go ahead.
Yeah, it's pronounced Matsukas, and don't worry, man, I'm very used to the mispronunciation.
Yeah, well, Nick is so accomplished in his view and knowledge of Prog that he has earned the nickname Prog Nick, and that is something few people can say, and he is stuck with that moniker now, probably until the end of his life. And so Nick is a music attorney in South Africa, a drummer. He's involved in the Late Night Live on Cruise to the Edge, and everybody that's involved in Prog online and on these cruises, I'm sure knows who Nick is. So also we have Jeff Bailey, who is now I guess we can say an accomplished songwriter. One of Neal Morse's few co-writers in the history of his songwriting career. He's credited on the new Neal Morse album. So he's also a writer, a reviewer. Jeff, say hi.
Hello. And I'm really an accountant by day. You see, all this other stuff is my spare time stuff, but it's good fun. But yeah, and it's amazing. How replying in an email ends up getting you songwriting credit. But there you go.
Yeah, so anybody that has the new album or has seen a few of the shows that Neal has done so far, he performs a song called Manchester, where he tells a story about how his friend from the UK corrected him on his lack of geography knowledge and fixed a lyric in the song, and that person is in fact Jeff, who we're so thrilled to know and have here on the podcast. I
met Nick at a Neal show in Leicester. In fact, outside a Neal show in Leicester, and this crazy South African who asked me to take a picture of him with a photograph of him with Nick. So that was when I first met him as well. So we're all vaguely connected.
Yeah, exactly.
As rabid a Neal Morse fan as I am, Jeff Bailey is the man who took the first picture of me with Neal Morse. He holds several distinctions.
Yeah, so this is definitely, you have people here who know their Neal Morse music and have been fans long before even the solo career, going back to the Spock's Beard stuff and Transatlantic and everything. So, all right, so what we're going to do here is, because my top 5 that we posted on the Prog Report was semi-controversial, I'll go with that top 5 from there, and each one of these fine gentlemen will mention their top 5, and we'll debate on the merits of our lists as we go along and play a few bits here and there of the song. So I'm going to start with my number 5, which is the Question Mark album, which, look, we love all these albums. To put any of these in order is sort of a crazy idea, but it gets debates going and it's fun, and you can never really be wrong in here, except I've been told by Jeff that I'm clearly wrong at putting Question Mark at number 5. So the reason why it's not higher on the list for me is that while it's a great album, I always felt it was, and this is weird to say, a bit short. And it's the shortest of his concept records. and there are very few songs on it that are by themselves songs. It's sort of like one long song that just keep and goes from one thing into the next, into the next, into the next. And for me, I always felt like I wanted it to be a little bit more because it was great, but it just didn't have the extra maybe 15 minutes of a few more things on it that I sort of liked in my Neal Morse albums. But my ranking of it sort of grew even higher. It probably wouldn't have been 5 a few years ago, but when he played it in full in Morsefest, it really had a great effect on me, and I thought I got it a little bit more. So, I mean, for me, my favorite tracks on it are Outside Looking In, and then leading into that song 12, that 12, 13 minutes of whatever that is probably the highlight of the record for me. I don't know what you guys think about that part, but that's my take on Question Mark.
So let me chime in there and say that, Roy, you ask the hardest questions, man. The worst Neal Morse album would probably make the top 5 list of just about any other artist. That's my personal view, but I know that thousands share that view. So this is kind of like having 9 beloved kids and deciding which 4 to send to the orphanage.
Yeah.
So let me start off by saying that I could change my mind 5 times during this conversation, so anything could happen. But strangely, as I was thinking about this today, and again, I might change my mind, I kind of agree with you on Question Mark. It comes so close to his other masterpieces, but for me, and Jeff, I know that if I was sitting there next to you, you'd probably be elbowing me in the face right now. But for me, it somehow doesn't quite reach the brilliance of several of his other albums, and it's very, very marginal. It's truly almost an approach of wow, I want to change my mind about this. Yes, no, I'm going to put it in. No, I'm not. And then I just find myself actually not including it in the top 5. So I'm probably giving away the game there a little bit. But
no, that's okay.
It ended up not making the list for me, which was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
I mean, there's the albums that I didn't have on that I'm not going to talk about in the top 5. It's true what you're saying. I in fact love and would rank them in the top 5 of most lists. So you're right. So this is really all just in good fun. But what is your number 5 then, Nick?
My number 5, I know I'm probably in the minority for this, but I'm going to make a point about this. I've been meaning to make a point about this online for a while, so I guess this is my chance. My number 5 is Momentum.
Wow.
And to me, that together with Lifeline remains one of Neal's most underrated albums. I don't really get why everybody sort of tends to put it at number 9 or number 8. In my opinion, it's one of Neal's best, most powerful, most beautiful albums. There, I mean, the epic that's on the album, World Without End, is just fantastic. In my opinion, it's one of his most powerful. There are all kinds of cool little surprises on the album, like Thoughts Part 5. There was never a Thoughts Part 4, which, the whole continuation of the Spock's Beard Thoughts, a series of songs, that really excited me. And the song itself is great. I thought Freak was very clever. Wuthering Sky was fabulously powerful. And the song Momentum itself, with that fantastic Paul Gilbert guitar solo. I mean, they're all great in my opinion. I know the songs are shorter than Neal's usual fare, but that doesn't make them any less magnificent for me. And just because there's no central concept to speak of on the album doesn't weaken it, in my opinion. I will admit that Smoke and Mirrors, in many people's opinion, is perhaps the weakest moment on the album, and for some, it's not Neal's best moment overall. But I don't think it reduces the album's value. I quite like it, and I think the rest of the album more than makes up for it and doesn't prevent it from making it onto the list. So I really wanted to make a point about Momentum. I encourage all the folks out there who are listening to give it another listen, because I think it's a great album. So that's my number 5.
I agree with you. I love that Momentum album. I think it's fantastic. I just it really just becomes a thing where I don't know what to put it above, and you sort of had to slot it somewhere. But at the time, even now, I mean, I thought the thoughts song on there, Freak, I think is a really cool song for him. So I would agree. I think it's a great album. All right, Mr. Bailey.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say too much about Question Mark until I calm down, but I'll come back to that in my top 10. And to be honest, my number 5 was really, I debated long and hard between Momentum but eventually chose The Grand Experiment over it. So I completely agree with everything Nick has said about the merits of Momentum. I just wanted to get The Grand Experiment into here, and this was really the only place I could bring it in. And I suppose we see the start of the Neal Morse Band collaboration, and I think that we've already seen it in by that stage we'd already seen it in Flying Colours and Transatlantic, how working in that band environment, and Spock's of course as well, but working in that band environment very much brings out the best in Neal. And I think there's many people who've been amazed on that album, and subsequently by the contributions of Bill and Eric. Again, like Momentum, another brilliant epic in Alive Again, and a lot of really high quality short songs. A song that divides the fans in the same way probably that Smoke and Mirrors does in Agenda, but a song that I think really came to life on the Similitude tour. Yeah. I think most people who saw that. And then the other thing is, a bonus disc which had 3 tracks in New Jerusalem and Doomsday Destiny and MacArthur Park that could easily have made the grade, in the main album. And in fact, 2 out of those 3 appeared at Morsefest, in live debuts, and were rapturously received. So I just love the Grand Experiment album. I think there's so much in it, and it just kind of it took things to me at the point in Neal's career where the Randy Neal Mike thing had happened lots of times, and the Neal Morse Band formation was the injection that took things to another level.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's not, wasn't in my top 5, I'll say, but if I had to pick a top 5 song, I can tell you that The Call would probably be in it from that album, which I think is just one of the best songs he's ever done. I
think the standard of The Call reflected by the fact that it served brilliantly as a show opener on the Grand Experiment tour, and it served brilliantly as a show closer on the Similitude tour.
No, that album was great because it you were wondering how many albums, what left could Neal do with the trio after Momentum, and he already did a follow-up to Testimony, and so it's like, well, what's left? What can he do that would be different or more or sort of inject some new life into it? And that the Grand Experiment album totally did that, which I thought was why it was so well received. I think it did really, really well for the band at the time. So you know what? This is a good place. Let's. I'm going to stop here and play the title track from The Grand Experiment. This is The Grand Experiment.
She tries to keep me Where it stops, nobody knows. Round and round, round and round goes. This is la 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 la. It's a grand experiment using every element. It's a grand experimental life. It's a grand experiment, a well-planned bizarre event. It's a grand experimental life. It's a grand experiment using every element. It's a grand experimental life. It's a grand experiment. Here it comes down everywhere. It's a grand experimental life.
Okay, that was Grand Experiment. Jeff's number 5. I will jump into my number 4, which is Testimony 2. I like Testimony 2. It gets a little bit of a boost for the second disc, which I love. Supernatural is another one of my favorites, and the Seeds of Gold epic might be my favorite epic that he's done. But the album, the first disc, which is the story of him, with Jada and with Spock's beard and leaving them, and I really, really like that album. And live, it was just some unbelievable. The closing for "It's for You" to crossing over, that whole part at the end is just one of the peak moments in his catalog for me. I love that album a lot. Great album.
Yeah, can't disagree with that. I mean, again, saw it on the Europe tour with the European band, and it was great. And again, what a highlight of Morse Fest last year. Really, how to take. I suppose I wondered whenever the talk came about that he was going to do Testimony 2. It was, what's that going to be? But it's a great compliment to the first album, and yet an album that tells the story without just telling the same story again, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the point about Testimony too. Everybody was expecting this sequel, and it had only been a couple of years since he had done Solar and Lifeline. And I remember when Testimony 2 was released, I was still ears deep in the brilliance of those albums. And when I heard that a single to Testimony was going to be released, I remember thinking to myself, well, not even Neal could maintain this standard. It's a sequel, so it's only been a couple of years. Give the guy a break. You can't expect it to be the same standard as, let's say, a Lifeline or a Solar, both of which I love. And I didn't think that the production and the composition could be as good as those albums. But when it was released, I mean, man, talk about being inspired by a miracle. Even I underestimated how prolific that man's brilliance is. Testimony 2 is right up there for me. I totally agree with you.
Okay, Nick, what do you got?
So number 4 was the hardest one for me because I've had to change my mind about 5 times on this. Testimony, ? Sola Scriptura, Lifeline, Grand Experiment, what to choose. I don't know, man. I'm still torn as I speak to you, to be honest. But after a bit of agonizing and considering the options and opinions of other Neal fans, I've decided for number 4 to go with Sola Scriptura. Maybe I was just in a heavier mood today, but I do want to preface my comments and this choice by giving Lifeline an honorable mention here. I do believe that is Neal's other very underrated album. A lot of people don't give it the credit it deserves. I think it deserves a far better rep than it has. And I swapped these two a few times in my mind. Lifeline is more melodic, it's positive, it's life-affirming, all that good stuff. And it's just as brilliant, in my opinion. I mean, you think about Leviathan, Lifeline itself, So Many Roads, The Way Home, which is one of my favorite songs. I mean, I very, very nearly put Lifeline in here. That's why I'm letting it chew up so much of your airtime, Roy. But having copped out so dramatically, I've decided to go with Solar for the number 4 spot, probably because it stands out as Neal's heaviest, darkest, most heavyweight creation, while still never compromising the melodic approach that he's so famous for. It's also a very controversial album in its investigation of, the rift between Martin Luther and the church establishment. And I guess a bit of controversy is always good. There are only 4 songs by name on the album, but when you think about it, so many dozens of styles really are covered. Weirdly, when I first heard it, I didn't particularly love that chorus refrain in The Door, which, that bit, in the name of God you must die. I remember thinking to myself,
it's a bit dark. It's a bit dark, yeah.
Yeah, a little dark maybe. But the rest of the album is just so incendiary that any prog metal band in the world would be proud of it. I mean, it's as complex as anything you've ever heard. You've got those heavy Paul Gilbert guitar solos, the crazy arrangements. You've got Underground, which is as complex and rock oriented and heavy as anything you've ever heard, all the way to that flamenco vibe of 2 down, 1 to go.
Yeah,
I mean, Solar ticks every box and then some. I will say that it possibly lacks the big ending of, say, ? But in general, Solar is just an amazing album. You cannot not love this album. So, wow, with great pain and great regret, I have to say sorry to Lifeline, my child. I love you more than everybody else.
I think you're making the right choice there. I think, with all due respect to Lifeline, I think Solar is clearly heads above that album. But yeah, as it is, I can respect the tough choice there. But I agree with you. Sola Scriptura I love, and I'm going to get back to Sola a little bit later for myself. Jeff, what's your 4?
Phasing seamlessly into my number 4, which is Lifeline.
Well, there you go. Perfect.
So after Roy's definitive statement of it can't not be in there. Well, it's in mine. I mean, let me say one thing about Sola. I mean, because I suppose in certain forums, I'm famous for not being a fan of some of the heavier prog metal bands that some of my Mexican and Brazilian friends love so dearly. And I don't know. I mean, Sola is brilliant. Of course it is. I think my thing about Sola is that I found it really, really hard to digest when it came out. And I remember Neal talking once recently about how he felt that Spock's Beard Day for Night had been damaged because they'd broken Healing Colours of Sound up into 6 individual tracks rather than one epic, and that he thought maybe that people hadn't bought the album because of that. I actually would have loved Sola to be broken up a bit more, and I think that was the thing that whenever I remember getting it and just finding it really, really hard to wade through, and it's a challenging album. But then, again, the Morse Fest performance, was superb. It was a tour de force. So I love it, but it's not on my list. And Lifeline is. So let me say why. Probably a surprise to many people. For many people, and with respect to the quality of all the albums, it's often viewed as the bottom of the pile. But not for me. And a killer lead track in Lifeline. It was the kickoff track of Morse Fest last year, and it was just amazing. And I think I've always thought that the Momentum title track, was quite similar to it. And I always thought it was a shame that Momentum on that tour got a lot of profile as the lead track when Lifeline didn't. And then straight into So Many Roads, which again proved itself. Sorry, it's not straight into it in the album, but
right.
The epic on that album, an absolutely brilliant track, and again, brilliantly done live. But the thing that I really like about Lifeline, a couple of things. It came after the run of Testimony, One, ? Sola, and then suddenly there was an album that wasn't a concept album. There came an album which not only had a big epic, not only had some shorter songs, but had some of the more singer-songwritery things, which we'd seen on albums like, even Spock's Beard 5, those kind of songs. It had some more kind of, I guess, worshipy type tracks. Certainly God's Love, very, very kind of, a very clear sort of, in that kind of could have fitted onto one of Neal's worship albums. I just loved the variety of it. And Fly High, a brilliant closing track as well. And I think I'm trying to remember, was it Fly High has Paul Bilatovich on it again, a brilliant guitar solo on there. And I also loved the again, a great bonus disc with a few other tracks that again could have cut it on the album. Some great covers, and of course I'm a Heavy Metal long-haired Bluebeard tattooed Jew as the hidden track. So again, to me, it was just, it nearly would be the sort of album where if somebody came to me and said, well, what's Neal Morse all about? And you can only give me one CD. I think it's an album that has a lot of the constituent parts of what Neal does. And it's that variety, along with obviously the quality of it, that I love.
That might be true. If you wanted to show all his sides on one disc, that might be a fair way to describe Lifeline, actually. But I agree. Listen, So Many Roads is brilliant, and I always love that. So yeah, I do. I think Lifeline a lot gets sort of begrudged as the least good. I'm not going to say bad. But yeah, I listen. This is cool because you know what? We're getting 3 completely different perspectives with all different choices. So this is working out well, and we're probably going to end up talking about all 9 albums.
I have to say, well said, Jeff. Well said.
I thought you were going to steal my piece, Nick, when you started. You told me.
Yeah, it really did.
All right. So I want to go back because I wanted to give Testimony to a shout out musically on here. So I want to break for a track from that album right now. I'm going to play It's For You, and then we'll come back and continue.
Inside of me, electric healing wave. Then I heard a voice within that cut me like a knife. When I asked him if it was for me, the full surrendered life. It's for you. I'll give you what this world can never give. It's for you. This goes beyond the life that you now live. Take my hand, trade everything you are for everything I am. Hey! There I stood upon the edge, gazing at the gap. Once my feet had left the ledge, there was no turning back. I jumped in with both feet that day. I stepped in completely. And now all that I have to say is it isn't just for me. It's for you. I'll give you what this world can never give. What I have, this goes beyond the life that you now live. Take my hand, trade everything you are for everything I am.
All right, so moving on. For me, this list became easier for me picking my favorite three. The order of them tricky a little bit, but I knew right away what my top three albums were going to be when I was putting my list together. It was 4 through 9 that were the challenging parts for me. So again, this is 3 or 2. I don't know, but I put the album 1 at number 3, and the album is just beyond words brilliant. Everything about it is amazing. There's every reason to consider it my favorite Neal Morse album. I put it short just a little bit because I might listen to the others more, I think ends up being the case. But what I recall about that album when it came out at the time was Spucksbeard, going back, was everything to me. That band, when he was in the band, quickly in a short span of 3 years became my all-time favorite band. I'm not embarrassed to say that. So when he left, I was devastated. And when his first album out of the gate was Testimony, and I knew it was sort of based all about his story about finding God and religious space and stuff, that was a little harder to swallow for me musically. I always sort of separated those two things with music and religion. And so it didn't. I still made myself listen to that album, and I ended up liking a good fair amount of it. But I was sort of at a stage where, with Neal's music, well, if this is what all the music's gonna be, I'm not sure how much of it I'm gonna really cling to moving forward. I wasn't sure where we were going with the music. One clearly made me accepting of everything he was going to do. The way he put the religious-based story into the concept and made it accessible, and the music was as good as anything I've ever heard in my life. I said, okay, he sold me. I'm in for these albums. Let's see what we're gonna get. And Separated Man. I mean, there's not a better song than that. And then bringing Portnoy along to do Author of Confusion, that crazy metal with that crazy Gentle Giant vocals that he always likes to throw in. I mean, there's some stuff on there that was better at that time than he had ever done. So it solidified his solo career for me. It made me a greater fan again, and so it holds a special place for me, that album. So that's it. That's one for me at number 3.
I love the one album. It's not on my list, but I love it. And I think the interesting thing about one, and this is a thing that I've sort of picked up along the way, it's an album that Randy was actually really, really heavily involved in as well. If you actually look at the credits of the one album, I think Randy's credited on maybe 5 out of the 8 songs. Lyrically, Randy contributed a lot to that album as well as musically, and of course this was the first album that Randy appeared on. The first time I ever saw Neal Morse live was when he ended up doing a church service here in Belfast. So we ended up hosting them, and in that service he basically sat at the piano and did pretty much all of the one album, apart from Author of Confusion, right the way through to Father of Forgiveness, on either the piano and the guitar, and laddie-dad his way through the bits that other instruments were played, and it was pretty mind-blowing stuff. Again, a brilliant album. Not on my list today, but could well be in it tomorrow.
That's amazing. All right, Nick, what do you got?
Well, I'm going to reserve my comments about one for the moment, if that's okay.
Yep.
Maybe I'm throwing a spanner in the works here in terms of ordering this thing for you, Roy, but my number 3 is The Similitude of a Dream. So I guess that might be a surprise to everyone, because I'm known to be a traditionalist, and Similitude is traditionally, in every sense, a brilliant album. But it comes in at my number 3, which might surprise a lot of people because, we have a Neal Morse group, and at that particular time that I was asked for my top 10, my top 5, Similitude didn't make it. But now, today, as I speak to you, it's my number 3. After all the hype that was created by Mike's comments prior to its release, and just the sheer build-up that was created online before it was released, I remember when I first heard it, feeling just a little bit underwhelmed. Little things on the album concerned me. I felt that Ways of a Fool didn't, for example, fit thematically and musically with the rest of the album. There were a couple of moments where I found myself thinking, okay, they could have edited this part out. And I just didn't love it with the immediacy that everybody else did. Maybe I'm just that guy who doesn't like going with the flow, because everybody else quite obviously instantly loved Similitude. But I genuinely, and I'll admit even maybe reluctantly, because there'd been so much hype, grew to love it in the months that followed, in the same way that I love everything else that Neal has done, even in his more obscure days. Today, it's right up there with Neal's other albums for me. So this is the great grower for me. And I guess having watched it performed in full 3 times, including the final performance at Morsefest 2017, has helped. But this is the great Neal Morse grower album for me. And I guess, that's one of the reasons why we love prog, right? Because of that grower aspect.
But there's always something more to learn about an album and listen and experience. It's not
right.
They're not formative pop songs that you heard it. You heard it a couple of times, you got it. It's not. I agree. It's not. That's what is special about it.
Exactly. Similitude is that album for me. All the hype made me want to love it immediately, but I didn't. It took some time, but man, did it get there. And when it got there, I got it big time. And so Similitude is a definite, if in respect of our friends that Jeff has referred to, if a surprising number 3, but it's definitely number 3 for me.
Okay, Jeff, what's your number 3?
Number 3, I've gone for Testimony 1, as these things end up being called once number 2 comes along, and that really has come out of reading your original list, Roy, and it did actually prompt me to go back and listen to some things, and I had a listen through Testimony during this past week, and it kind of really hit me over the head as to what a brilliant album that is. And I think in terms of context, you spomentioned being a fan for a long time. Hearing that, Spock's were going to be no more, Spock's beard pretty much came out and said we were going to carry on straight away. Neal didn't, and I think if you read his book, he talks about how he really didn't know what was going to come next. Was it going to be ministry? Was it going to be Christian music? Was it going to be whatever? And then he got hit with this, divine inspiration and an outpouring of music that became this album. And it came after Snow, the double concept album, and then word came out that Neal was releasing an album that was going to be a double concept album. Wow. Mike Portnoy was involved. Wow. And I just, this was an album that I loved on the very first listen. Think of the artists that try and think of something in the prog rock genre that is as personal as this. And Neal talks about how in the past, Full Moon Rising, Open Wide the Floodgates, he was singing about his faith and what he was experiencing, but he had to disguise it. And suddenly this is given free rein. He's singing freely about this stuff that, he's been afraid to put to the forefront for a variety of reasons. And again, there's just so much powerful music that comes out of this, and it's a full probably 2.5 hours of music, the recurring themes, just all the things that we always loved about Neal's music. And I think the album is great. The contemporary live DVD of that I just think is brilliant as well. And again, again the whole thing of having enough songs that kind of can stand on their own, as well. There's a lot of thematic stuff in the overtures, but a lot of just really great songs. If they came up in a random shuffle, Moving in My Heart and Oh Lord My God, Rejoice, and so I mean Testimony. When I had to listen through to it recently, I realized actually this is a really powerful album and a really personal album, and
I think there's sort of a different camps, right, for Testimony. There's and maybe this is incorrect, but I sort of feel like this, that there's the fans that are a little bit more fans of Neal with his view of religion and followers of Christ and that type of thing a little more strongly, that lean more towards an album like Testimony as being their favorite because it hits them something that they can relate to in their views of that stuff. And then maybe there's other fans that like Neal's music without having that that view, that album doesn't hit that mark, being as personal as it is. And I think that's sort of where that album gets divided, I think.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree. And I'm nail my colors to the mast. I'm in the former camp, and that's why it connected with me. And it was I can remember listening to, Open Wide the Floodgates and going, like, this really sounds like this guy's become a Christian. Because,
Snow sounded blatantly going down that road to me at the time, even. I mean, and it sort of it had that whole message behind it clearly. So I think you sort of, if you look back now, you can go, oh, of course. What were we all missing?
Well, here's the point. I know that Jeff is also a great fan of Spock's Beard 5, as am I. In my opinion, it's very possibly the finest album ever recorded. It's quite a statement to make, but it truly is a thing of marvelous brilliance. And the forerunner to Prog Nick was called Stuyvesant's and Liquor on His Breath. Not that I'm a smoker. I'm not. And the only alcohol I drink is beer.
The Great Nothing, right? The Great Nothing.
But, at the time the Testimony one was released, I was not going through a particularly faithful phase in my life. And the point was proved to me that it really didn't matter what Neal was singing about as much as the fact that Neal was singing it and Neal was composing it. I, too, was one of those who was marginally reluctant to absorb this new message, this new approach at the time. Things may have changed for me in the meantime, but at the time I was at very best speculative. At worst, I was potentially cynical about it. But when it came out, it proved the point that great music is great music, no matter what the message is that's being imparted. And in that respect, Testimony is a different kind of grower, because a lot of people have come to accept it, even though their faith may not have changed, their beliefs may not have changed, they may not be in the former camp that Jeff referred to. But many, many hundreds, if not thousands of fans have come over to love that album,
sure,
even if they had to get over themselves lyric-wise, if you know what I mean.
Well, look, I have friends that have had a hard time getting into Neal because of some of the message in the music. And before being a fan of his solo music, I would have said have been one of those people. I just never thought, never mind the faith, what faith you are. I like my music sort of separate from that. It was just always how I viewed that thing. But I more and more in listening to Neal's music from Testimony to one to moving on to the others, the more and more I realize I just don't care what he's singing. I'm with you, Nick. I'm like, it's just good. I don't care. And you know what? It's authentic coming from him. You know he means it, and I think that's what makes it work. It doesn't. It's not contrived or nothing. The guy believes it, and more power to him. You know, and that's it.
I think the other thing I would observe, and again, this is probably from some of our chats that we've had in other places, are, you know, lyrics are something that's really important to me. You know, and there are albums that I can think of 2 albums that I don't recently I don't like, and I just don't like them because I don't like the lyrics. The last Roger Waters album and the last Marillion album are 2 albums that musically are kind of in my space, but the words kind of, and it's not that I'm saying that, you know, I only listen to music that I completely agree with everything the lyrics say, but I think it's something probably that I'm quite sensitive to as well. And yeah, as you've said, that this was stuff that kind of hit the spot for me as well. But it's interesting. It's interesting, the balance between those 2 things can be something that, you know, makes you go, actually, you know, you know, bands that I like or music that I like go, but lyrically it's kind of not hitting it for me, you know. So I get that, because I also get that people might respond that way to Testimony.
So you know what? I think this is a good part. We've given Testimony quite a bit of a run here, which is great. We'll play one of my favorite songs from that album, and check that out. This is "Colder in the Sun."
Didn't go my way. I did what I did yesterday. There wasn't any way to change my heart. Like a light to the door. Like a light to the door. Like a light to the wind. Like a light to the door. I was growing cold in the sun. lock to the door, like a latch to the window, close to everyone. Like a lock to the door, like a latch to the window. I was growing colder in the sun.
So number 2, we might be getting to the point where we've talked about some albums already, so we'll see how it goes. But my number 2, and was my number 1 forever and ever and ever, is Sola Scriptura. And if you ask me in a month from now, it might go back up to number 1. But I don't know. But I know you spoke about it, Nick, earlier. I just can't believe it's one of those albums when I listen to it. Every time I listen to it, I say to myself, I can't believe how good this is. And it has there's 2 aspects to it that I love a lot. One is the abundance of musical styles, where he just goes from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, seamlessly, every different genre or style you could think of, and it's flawless. Which is impressive in its own right. There's a few repeating themes that are some of my favorite themes. There's that sort of crazy intense sort of piano, super fast drum thing that they do that repeats throughout a few of the songs, which is brilliant. And then the main sort of closing theme at the end of the second track, the conflict, that's also the closing theme of the conclusion at the end, is possibly my favorite theme that he's done in his solo records. That orchestral moment. It's funny because again it's an album where I find myself singing out loud in the car, God and this like a moron, and it makes me laugh every time. I lose myself in it every time, just like a crazy person. And the conflict is, if there was a 30-minute epic that is flawless for me, it's that one. It is just, I love the heaviness. I was always a Dream Theater fan growing up, so this album brings a little bit of that for me into it. And it is an all-timer for me.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's truly a masterpiece, and the variation, as I think you used the word seamless, going from the door into Two Down, One to Go, and then back to Underground. I mean, it's It's just an amazing piece of
You know,
work.
I
really.
want to go back to one thing you said, Jeff, which is funny because you said that you wish this album had been broken up into separate songs, and I did that. I had enjoyed the album for a long time, and it wasn't the reason you had, it was easier to digest. It was just that I liked so many parts of the album, that there were times when I would be driving in the car, and I would say, I just want to hear the ending of the conflict, the already home part, or I just want to hear Underground, and just parts that would come up. They go, I want to hear that 4 minutes. So I separated the first two epics into 12 tracks for my own benefit, which has been awesome, and I recommend doing that sometimes. It's a fun bit to do.
I must do that. And recently I was doing, I was just going through some of the videos that were on YouTube, the Neal Morse sort of official type videos, and I don't think I'd seen it before, but Christian Rios had made a video using the Morse Fest footage plus some other stuff for The Vineyard, and actually just seeing that as a standalone song, it's just incredible. And actually looking at that going, gosh, those people who, if they saw that, it would completely blow their perception of what Neal Morse was about, because it's a really great video and it's a really heavy and powerful song. So yeah.
All right, Nick, what's your number two? I've got to move this thing along.
So you guys have discussed this at reasonable length. My number two has to be One, which is a masterpiece. It's filled with so many fabulous prog moments. That whole concept of man's abandonment and reunification with God. It's just brilliantly delivered from the start of the album to the finish. It's got everything: emotion, crazy prog chops, the concept, the hooks, the melody that Neal is so famous for, the power, the innovation. It's got everything. It's really something that took my breath away when I first heard it, and still today takes my breath away when I listen to it again. Roy, we're spoiled. In 2018, as prog fans, we get a little blasé about quality. We even get a little bit jaded from time to time because a lot of great prog is coming our way. But just imagine you were listening to One for the first time today. I mean, this is beyond a classic.
Yeah.
Just think about some of the songs on this album: Author of Confusion, The Creation, Separated Man. I mean, Author of Creation has become a staple at Neal's gigs, and there's a good reason for that. All these songs are very hard to beat. And I would say even for Neal, that they're hard to beat. And I would point out the performances on this album. I remember Mike Portnoy saying at the time that this was possibly his best performance to date. I think that's true of Mike's performances on this, and Randy's as well. The same might be said of him. The compositions are flawless. The band is on fire. In my opinion, One is one of the greatest progressive rock albums of all time. So it comes in at my number two.
I can't argue there. Mr. Jeff, number two.
Yeah, number two. Toss up between my number two and my number one, but and we've talked about it already. Similitude is my number two. And we'll probably talk about it again, possibly even. But two albums, really, really high quality throughout the discs. Obviously, there was the whole debate at the time between what we know about in the band. Should it be one? Should it be two? And I mean, I do feel that everything that is on there is merited and has its place. It does a great job of telling the story, and perhaps more so than many of the concept albums, there's so much of it that can be plucked out as a standalone track. You don't need to know where it fits in, and that's a great thing, I think, in terms of music. Again, stellar performances by Bill, Eric, as well as Randy and Mike. But again, that vocal combination that the Neal Morse band now has, and the ability to switch in Eric at the appropriate moment. I know that it was debated or it was talked about at the time in various interviews that Neal gave the grand finale, of the piece over to Eric, and we've all seen that. The three of us have seen that live, and know the sheer power of that. And again, an album that I saw this 3 nights in a row in the UK, performed in full live. You know, for some people that would
Wow.
be a punishment, but it was three consecutive nights, and yet every time, you know, it just blew me away, and every time there was, you know, it just kept giving. Yeah, so
I'm with you.
so
All right. Well,
why is it not my number one? Well, it's my number two.
I'm gonna be, instead of playing a song right now, I want to jump into my number one because it's Similitude of a Dream, and you just talked about it. So I'm just gonna move on into that. You know, what I remember about that album was, of course, there was the hype and everything, and I had we got a couple of the songs sort of previewed before, and I deliberately didn't listen to anything. It was the first time I've ever done that. Where I said, I don't want to hear just 3 separate songs. I don't want to hear it, and I didn't. And then look, you know, we're fortunate, and I'm fortunate enough to get music in advance early, you know, for reviewing and things like that. And so I was sent the Similitude album, and it was fortunate. The wife and the kids were going to be out for a few hours that evening, and so I said, okay, I'm sitting down, 2 hours, here we go. When you never get to do that. It's a lost
Yep.
art to get to do that. Man, if I wasn't blown away right off the bat, and I almost wish I could do that again, because that's an experience you can't get. The first time of listening to something like that completely, every part of it hit me great. You know, The Ways of a Fool. I was like, we're only a half hour in, and I'm like, this is the greatest song ever. And then the epic where it makes no sense. The song Makes No Sense was the first thing that really, there's a certain part in there where he brings in Eric to sing a higher part of a chorus, and then Bill comes in and takes it even higher. And I thought, man, that's brilliant. And then that reprisal in So Far Gone where they do that is breathtaking. My one anticipation, I'm already, you know, halfway into disc 2, and I'm saying to myself, because I have one thing that's Snow, and this is such a stupid criticism, but the one minor criticism I've always had of Snow, as brilliant as it is, was I felt like there should have been a different epic ending than a repeat of Wind at My Back. And I was always sort of let down at first when that happened. I've grown to love it, and it's great. But I was waiting sort of for something else at the time anyway. And I'm listening to Similitude, and I'm getting towards the end, and all I could think about is the anticipation of what's the epic ending going to be. Don't let me down with the epic ending. Just don't do a Snow. Like, don't do that. Right? And it was everything and then some. It was everything and then some. The come on that Eric gives at the end is just, it's the end all. And I immediately called certain people that we know that love this stuff, and I said that you're going to die when you hear it. I said, you're going to die when you hear this. And so, I just think it's great. And, you know, for double concept albums for me have always been sort of tricky, because I always, and there's very few times when I don't eventually make a single disc of my favorite songs from it. I do that a lot. And I always go, well, these 3 I don't really care for. I'll cut them out. I'll make a 1 disc. I've done that many, many times because I'm very sort of picky over time. I like every single song on this album. There isn't one song that I skip. And that is why I put it at number 1, because of the magnitude of it, and that there's not one bad thing on it for me. So here's where I'm going to stop and play a song from that, and we're going to play So Far Gone.
Into the change, but now it feels so wrong. There's mountains in my way, and I just can't go on. How did I get so far gone to who I am today? How did I get so
So we got two more. I'm done with mine. Nick, I'm really curious to see what your number one is because I can't figure it out based on your list. So what do you have?
Yeah, Roy. I'm going a little subjective on this one, if you'll permit me. I hope this is not an indulgence on my part, but I'm going to go with a personal perspective here, and I guess it's a bit of a curveball. The answer for me is that Neal's number one album is Testimony 2. But I throw in a caveat, and the caveat is that it's Testimony 2 for both discs. In other words, the double disc version.
I always count them as both too, and that's why I had it high for me. I agree there.
Right. I mean, obviously the reason is that Seeds of Gold is a master epic. It doesn't form part of the core story, and that's why it's on disc 2. You know, I always buy Neal's stuff with all the extended versions and the bonus material and the making of DVDs and whatever it comes with. I always buy the full package. So when it arrived, I mean, I didn't really draw the distinction, to be honest with you. But I mean, you cannot ignore Seeds of Gold. You know, that second solo at about 20 minutes in by Steve Morse, the whole thing, that Bach fugue type theme that it starts with, for me, Seeds of Gold is kind of like the epic to end all epics, really. And of course, the rest of the album keeps pace with it. Time Changer is just an incredible piece of prog at its very sublime best, in my opinion. I love the whole album. It strikes a personal chord with me. I think the message behind it, as personal as it is to Neal, resonated with me too at the time. And as I've said earlier, I remember when it arrived thinking, you know, don't expect too much. It's a sequel. You know, give the guy a break. I mean, he's created all these brilliant albums. You can't expect the same standard. But again, I underestimated just how prolific Neal's brilliance is. This miracle that inspired him had been left. He hadn't told the story. He had intentionally chosen not to tell that part of the story in the first Testimony album. And here it was. I mean, everybody knows the story of Neal's daughter's healing, his departure from Spockspear, but nobody could have predicted that those stories would turn into an album as spectacular as this. And I remember just being dumbstruck. Watching it performed live at Morsefest 2015 was super special for me personally. I guess that I'm putting a subjective slant on this, but I hope that's a liberty I'm allowed to do here. Testimony 2, for me personally, is a very, very special album. It's never far from my CD player, and it's my number one Neal Morse musical son.
Can't argue with that.
Yeah.
I think we know what your number one is, so.
Okay, for those of you who don't, listening out there, yeah, question mark. That's interesting that we started with question mark, didn't we? We're going to end with question mark.
My number 5, yeah.
So, which again, just to me, says a lot. Yeah, question mark. You know, so there's lots of things that I associate with it, but very briefly, there was a great. If you were a fan at the time, there was a great build up to this. There was the mystery album that was coming out. There were different clues as to who the special guests were going to be on this album, and you know, it's got Alan Morse in there singing. It's got Royna. It's got Steve Hackett doing that incredible guitar solo on what song is it in? I can't remember now. Anyway, Steve Hackett playing a brilliant guitar solo in one of the songs. It's got Jordan Rudez at the crazy keyboard stuff. So again, having come from 1 and Testimony 2, you know, the special guests were on board. It's 56 minutes long, absolutely. And Roy said one of the reasons one of the things about it was its lack of length. I just think for me it's the perfect length. You know, there's a deep narrative, and I totally take the point again that's been made earlier on. It's not necessarily easy to slice bits out of it and listen to them stand alone. And again, I think a lot of how I relate to this is you know, it's biblical, and I just love the way it's constructed because I kind of know you know, some of the parts of scripture that are in this. And the first time I saw Neal live with a band, was the European band, travelled over to London, and the first thing they did was live from start to finish, and it was just spectacular. And then Morse Fest 15, when it was done, I was fortunate enough to be at the dress rehearsal for that, and tears were shed in that performance. And I think really I think it's a different expression of Neal's faith, but I think particularly that whole ending into his presence, that part, it's a very powerful and moving piece of music, and I think a real expression of man's relationship to God, in a way that is completely different from the straight personal narrative of Testimony 2. And just for me, so many great moments, and it's just my number one.
Great. I mean, I love all the explanations and the reasoning behind this. I'm trying to think if every album was covered, and I think it was. I'm pretty sure we covered every single album between the three of us.
Yeah.
So that says a lot. I think.
Yeah.
I think it's always fun to look back and analyze what the reasons why you like something, the reasons why maybe you didn't, and compare it to something else. This was a lot of fun to do this with you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think it was pretty cool.
Very, very much, Roy. Thank you. Except for the orphanage part, I'm off there to get my 4 albums back.
Yeah,
it was great.
All right,
great.
so I think good place to end, and it's a good sort of epic ending song based on Jeff's pick at number 1. We'll close with a track off of Question Mark called Entrance, and we'll see you on the next one. Visit Prog Report for all your daily prog news, and there's more interviews and other podcasts to check out on iTunes and on the website. And we'll see you all again next time. Thank you.
I see a man with hair as white as wool, whose tongue's a sharp-edged tool, with feet like burning brass. Come, he says, I'll be your guide of sorts into the outer courts. I have made a way for the unclean ones to come into the gate, to the weakest ones I will give my strength, and the lowest ones, they will be brought higher. Let the unclean ones be washed in the fire. I am afraid I'll stay where I am. The Spirit takes my hand and gently leads me in. There is the laver, he drops me in the bath. It's like a sweet heart attack, and I hear his voice again.